Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1991 parody film Blobermouth. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Dark Metal Spider for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, Blobermouth, it's essentially the 50s Blob film with Steve McQueen, but with a new commentary, with a new voice dub, with some sound effects, and a different plot. And I want to give the folks behind this some credit for at least trying to do something different and for their effort, because this was definitely quite an undertaking, and it takes a lot of imagination and genuine skill to actually pull something like this off. And I do feel that the people involved, even though I didn't find it to be that funny, the fact that they can do a lot of this on the fly while they're just watching a movie, that is something that I think is worthy of at least a little bit of praise. All of that being said, though, I thought this was a really lame attempt to be Mystery Science Theater 3000. Like, let's be MST3K, but raunchier and have more fart and burp jokes and sexual innuendo and even more bad puns. And for some people that works. It didn't for me. This was a really hard film to sit through because it's just so many bad jokes one after another. And I thought it was just, for the most part, really cringe inducing, because it's like being forced to sit there and listen to your uncle's bad puns for over an hour and you can't leave the room. That's really what this film is like when it comes to watching it. It's directed by Kent Skov, who's a member of the LA Connection, who are the comedy troupe that riffed on the Blob for Blobbermouth, and honestly have made a bit of a, I don't know if I would say career, because I don't think they got paid that much to do all this, but they definitely left their mark on Los Angeles and film culture uh, around the time of their heyday, which was in the mid 80s to the early 90s, maybe a little bit of the mid 90s. They had a brief moment in time where they became a part of the zeitgeist that was Los Angeles, and they had this shtick where they would put on old movies like Night of the Living Dead or The Blob, and they would do commentary. So they would do voiceovers for the different characters. They would riff on the film live, or they would come up with different plots. And this actually led to them having their own show on syndicated television, or was it syndicated or was it public access? I think it was syndicated TV, and it was called Mad Movies. And they did like 26 episodes. And in these episodes, you had the LA Connection troupe. They did their dubbing, they did their whole shtick. But then you would also have somebody come in and, sit down with the host and talk about the movie or talk about some other stuff. And honestly, I feel this material and this approach, it works better in small doses. If it's like a 20-minute episode of Mad Movies, you're not getting an hour and 17 minutes of riffing and puns. You're only getting maybe 15 minutes, because there's all the interview segments that are thrown in. So, and the interview segments do break things up and break up the monotony and You might have an interesting guest, like with the Night of the Living Dead episode. Michael Medved was on there, who wrote the Golden Turkey Awards, which is a book from back in the day that talked about like the worst movies ever. So there was at least some sort of appeal because of the fact that you had some other perspectives that you could look forward to while you're watching the episode. You don't get that with this. You just get an over abundance of just awful attempts at comedy, and the direction, like, I can't really say anything about it because it's not like Kent Skov actually directed this film. It's The Blob from the 50s. I can't really say he directed anything. And the screenplay by Steve Pinto, Kent Skov, and Stephen L. Rollman, it's a plot that's created solely off of redub. So the plot this time around is there is a blob from outer space, but it's an obnoxious, unfunny stand-up comedian. And they call it a Blobermouth because, it won't stop riffing and won't stop talking. And you do have the same sort of characters from the original Blob, like Steve, but then the girl, for whatever reason, is now called Vaccine. I guess because they thought that Vaccine was such a funny name for the female lead. And there's various different other people from the original Blob who have different names. And there's a lot of references in the script to other TV shows from the 50s. Leave It to Beaver, the Andy Griffith Show, which that might have been a 60s show. But there's a lot of references to classic television. And I didn't grow up with those shows. I didn't watch them that much, so these references did nothing for me. Also, I felt they weren't really that funny because it's just like, oh, hey, this character is now Andy Griffith. This character is now Opie. This character is now Aunt B. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. This character is now Beaver. Like, all right. And there's other references, like the old guy who finds the blob, they call him Lloyd Bridges, which I kind of chuckled at because he does look like Lloyd Bridges. But then they kill the gag because then as soon as he opens his mouth, it's an Elmer Fudd impression. Like, you're in for a rough time when the first scene has just one long raspberry. It's just the two. It's Steven and Vaccine kissing, and it's somebody blowing raspberries for an uncomfortable amount of time, as if instead of them kissing, they were just farting in each other's mouths. And then the Blobbermouth, it comes down from outer space, and it's got animated lips on it, and it like it's trying to be, I don't know, some kind of version of Audrey from Little Shop of Horrors, but nowhere near as funny or charismatic. And I swear to God, the guy who was voicing Blobbermouth, it sounds like the same guy who voices Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, but if he was Jewish, like a more Jewish Carl. Well, not necessarily more, but a Jewish Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force. And this time, there's no Aqua Teens to save this movie. And you follow the plot of the original for the most part, except they've changed things around where now it's more about stand-up comics. Steve is a stand-up comic who's trying to put on a show. The Blobbermouth is trying to sabotage it and take the spotlight away from Steve. And there's other characters that the doctor guy who now is Swedish for some reason. And they make a repeated gag that he's Superman because he wears glasses and dresses like Clark Kent. But that really didn't make me laugh. It was just like, okay, yeah, all right. And there's just a lot of that in this screenplay, like just so many repeated gags that to me just aren't funny, or new gags that are just crass and just offensive for the sake of being offensive. Like the little boy named Opie is making sexual innuendos and talking about banging this girl, and I'm like, what is funny about this? This is just uncomfortable and all kinds of messed up. And you get some differences near the end. Like, instead of the blob being frozen, they're pumping it with well, not really pumping it, but they're spraying it with dairy products as whipped cream instead of it being a fire extinguisher, like fire retardant foam. It's whipped cream. And the Blobermouth is reacting, oh, I'm dead, I'm lactose intolerant, like, and there's just a lot of moments where you just have crass humor. Oh, characters are in a room and somebody's farting. Somebody will be talking and then they'll burp out of nowhere. There's no reason to really care about this new vision or this new concept or idea of the film's plot, because it's Steve, the way that he's portrayed, he's a jerk and he's not funny and he's not good at impressions. So there's nothing really to like about this guy. He constantly says something is bullshit. And I thought that was rather fitting because this film is bullshit for the most part. Like, this is bullshit. I'm like, yeah, it is. It's bullshit. Where you have characters commentating on, oh, they'll sniff something like, oh, this smells like dog crap. I'm like, yeah, just like this movie. It's dog crap. And you'll get stuff like where there's this one guy who's a mechanic and the blob eats him, but the blob is the it's the Blobermouth, so is testing out stand-up comedy on him and tickles him. Instead of killing him, he just tickles the guy. You get the movie theater scene, and I will give the script this, like, they changed the film that the audience is watching, and the film that they're watching is Ape, which honestly is a much better movie than this, and that film isn't good, but it's the kind of film that knows what it is, and it's so bad it's good at times. That's the one that's rather infamous because it has the scene where the guy in the ape suit flips off the camera. Um, and they actually show that scene in the movie theater. So I'll give the writers some credit for that. That was pretty fun. But the rap stuff, like the rap at the beginning, that was lame. That sucked. The other attempts to try to do musical numbers also suck. There's a lot of references to other elements of pop culture or somewhat well known names of the time, like different presidents, like President Reagan and Nixon. And there's other references here and there. It's just one of those things where if this is the kind of comedy, this is the kind of jokes that you find funny, then you'll get a lot out of it. If it's not, it's just the kind of stuff that doesn't make you laugh, then it's just really hard to sit through. Because you got people making silly voices and got all these different sound effects, and there's one point in the film where there's all these different like animal sound effects, and then some guy off screen yells, "Shut the fuck up!" And I'm like, that's how I feel about this entire film. I'm like, shut the fuck up! Stop riffing with bad dad jokes. Jesus Christ! I never thought that I would rather watch the original Blob rather than something like this, or I'd rather sit through Beware the Blob again. Honestly, I would. I'd rather sit through both of those again than Blobbermouth. So, yeah, it's just bad comedy, and it doesn't stop. It's just constant. It's incessantly just idiotic and dumb and inane. And there are some moments, to once again give the writers some credit, where they parody and provide like a satire of certain uh incredulous moments in the film itself. Like, those are the moments that kind of worked for me. And that's why I like Mystery Science Theater 3000, is because they're not just doing this whole, well, let's create a whole new story and let's make silly voices. Like, they're actually making observations about the film that they're watching. And also, Mystery Science Theater 3000 is actually funny. Like, I know that these guys technically were doing a lot of this stuff before MS3TK did, but MST3K, they took what you were doing and they improved the formula dramatically. That's all I have to say. It's the point where I wish I was watching the robots and Mike Nelson doing a commentary on the original Blob. I wish I was seeing that instead of whatever the hell Blobermouth is. And what can I say about the cast? I mean, it's just the LA Connection troupe doing their shtick. Bob Bucholz, Connie Sue Cook, Francis Kelly, Steve Pinto, Stephen L. Rollman, and Kent Skov. And they're just making silly voices. That's really what they're doing. One guy impersonates Elmer Fudd, or they'll do bad impressions, because that's a whole part of the shtick with Steve. He does a bad impression of Clint Eastwood and another bad impression of Marlon Brando. And throughout the entire film, with all these voice dubs, like I felt like that guy in the SpongeBob episode who was like, "Oh, brother, this guy stinks." Like, that's really that's how I felt. Or you're watching a bad routine, bad comedy routine, and you're just waiting for the hook to show up to pull somebody off stage, but it never comes. The hook never arrives, and so you're just stuck there watching somebody bomb for over an hour. That's what it's like watching and listening to this voice cast uh, dub the Blob in Blobbermouth. I mean, what can I really say about this movie? It's barely a film because it's just the Blob from the 50s, but with a new voiceover and just an overwhelming amount of bad, unfunny jokes. I mean, if you wanted to see a really poor, bad lip reading of the Blob from the 50s, then I guess this is the kind of film for you. Um, but if you want to see something that is actually funny or really worth your while, I don't really feel that this is that kind of film. But if it sounds interesting to you, if you actually are aware of the LA Connection, the guys and the gals who did the Mad Movies show, then this is probably something right up your alley. But if you're not, like, this is gonna be a tough sit. It really is, because it's not like there's anything that different about the plot other than the Blob is now a bad stand-up comic and has a animated mouth, and every now and then you might see a few other bits of visual effects. Like, there's a one scene where a vaccine is standing next to a wall and gets electrocuted, so you see some electricity effects. Other than that, there's not really much. And so it's not like it's really doing a whole lot visual effects wise to transform the film. It's pretty much just the Blob, but with a new voice dub and a really lame plot about two competing stand-up comics who both suck at being stand-up comics. And I guess that might be the whole point. Like, they're just bad. Like, there's even like a repeated gag with the Blobbermouth. Like, oh, he sucks. I can't stand it. His jokes are bad. I'm like, yeah. And why? Why are we continuing with this? If the jokes are bad, why are we making the audience have to suffer through so many bad jokes? Maybe that's the real horror of it all. And in all honesty, that is kind of terrifying. That's kind of a version. That's one level of personal hell for me. Is just being stuck having to listen to nothing but bad jokes over and over again. So you know what? I'll give the creators and the writers and the people involved with Blobbermouth some credit then, because uh, they created quite the abomination. Um, this is the kind of thing that for some people might be playing in hell. Because it's torturous. It's so torturous to sit through and tedious and boring, and it's all just one long bad joke. That's really what it is. And if the joke works for you and the shtick is funny, then it's enjoyable. But if it doesn't, it's just one long bad joke after another. And it doesn't matter what little bit of effects you throw on the screen, put lips on the blob, doesn't matter. Have rap or other musical numbers in between, doesn't matter what silliness you try to do or shenanigans you try to pull off. If it's just nothing but bad comedy for over an hour, it's incredibly painful to watch. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on Blobbermouth. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.